A national ID system is coming for the United States, and we're not supposed to know anything about it. I'm Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic, and let's dive in. Now, there's a really interesting write-up by Del Cameron of Wired on this particular issue, and if you didn't know, I have a preamble that basically says cybersecurity is agnostic to politics, but we're not immune from it. I do not care what you believe, but most people on the right and the left do not want a national ID system, and it's been something that has been railed against for literally decades, and we'll get to that. But let's start with the present, because the Department of Homeland Security is moving to consolidate its face recognition and other biometric technologies into a single system capable of comparing faces, fingerprints, iris scans, and other identifiers collected across its enforcement agencies. This is according to documents reviewed by, obviously, Wired. Now, the agency is asking private biometric contractors how to build a unified platform that would allow employees to search faces and fingerprints across large government databases already filled with biometrics gathered in different contexts. The goal is to connect components including Customs and Border Protection, CBP, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, the Transportation Security Administration, or TSA, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, the Secret Service, and DHS headquarters, replacing a current patchwork of tools that do not share data easily. The system would support watch listing, detention, or removal operations and comes as DHS is pushing biometric surveillance far beyond ports of entry and into the hands of intelligence units and those ICE agents that have been operating hundreds of miles from the border. Think Minneapolis, for example. The records show DHS is trying to buy a single matching engine that can take different kinds of biometrics, faces, fingerprints, iris scans, and more, and run them through some backend, giving multiple DHS agencies one shared system. And in theory, this means that the platform would be able to handle both identity checks and investigative searches as well. For face recognition, identity verification means, the system compares one photo to a single stored record and then returns a yes or no answer based on similarity. For investigations, it searches a large database and returns a ranked list of the closest looking faces for a human to review instead of having the AI independently make a call. So in other words, I look like Penn Jillette if Penn Jillette has been robbing banks, or I've been robbing banks, and one of us might get caught up in this database that a human would review, and hopefully I never want to be a false positive, nor would anybody, I assume, including Penn Jillette. Now, both types of searches come with real technical limits, at least for now. In identity checks, the systems are more sensitive, so they are less likely to wrongly flag an innocent person, but they will, however, fail to identify a match when the photo submitted is slightly blurry or angled or outdated. For investigative searches, the cutoff is considerably lower, and while the system is more likely to include the right person somewhere in the results, it also produces many more false positives that a human would actually have to essentially review. So thanks to Del Cameron, basically of Wired, for that primer. There's a lot more in his article, but I want to dive into this because think about what this new platform would allow DHS to do. We're talking cross-agency searches of biometric data, not just one-to-one identity verifications, ranked candidate results for investigative purposes, and also integration into existing encodings from legacy systems despite current incompatibilities. So, in my opinion, this actually moves the United States towards a de facto national ID. They might not call it that, but think about what's happening here. Because we are talking about the consolidation of biometrics across agencies, there's huge implications in that. This would be a unified biometric hub, especially one that holds fingerprints, face prints, and other identifiers, and that aligns with the definition of a national identity infrastructure, even if it's not technically or legally labeled a national ID. The ability to query across agencies moves towards a single truth source for basically our traits, our identity. And that is, I think, a huge problem. This also expands identifier usage beyond traditional contexts, right? So when biometric systems are used in routine interactions, not just like at immigration checkpoints at like the borders or the airport or something like that, this is signaling a shift from a narrow enforcement tool to a general identity profile, right? Because they're expanding this capability outside of just a port of entry. On top of it, existing US biometric infrastructure already exists. So this implies that what DHS is proposing is not entirely new, but it is actually consolidating and expanding the existing system into one uniform system, one uniform capability. And there also is no federal law restricting facial recognition use. A 2024 report from the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights found no federal statute currently prohibits or restricts or strictly regulates the government's use of facial recognition technology. This regulatory vacuum means that initiatives like DHS's can proceed without clear statutory guardrails. There's no framework around this. Congress would have to vote something into law. And that's a condition that often precedes centralized identity infrastructure adoption when I went looking for all of this. If the country doesn't have laws, you create a vacuum. If you create a vacuum, you're able to do things in that vacuum that nobody really has true oversight with until they catch it, or it's retroactive, and at that point, it just may be done. So if DHS does execute this and create then what would be essentially the next steps to creating a de facto national ID, something I will note, and I noted earlier, that several groups on both the right and the left have decried for years. Groups like the NRA, for example, have historically opposed moves like this because building a national database of gun owners, for example, in their case, would give the government a formal roadmap into things like confiscation. This has been the NRA's argument for years and years and years, decades and decades and decades. And there are a bazillion gun owners in the United States. It's part of the culture, right? That's the argument anyway. But let's look at this from a next steps, right? Some of which you could argue is already happening on a parallel track to this. We're moving towards this. And so I think the government would expand mandated collection of biometrics for all citizens, instead of only collecting biometrics from like non-citizens or certain immigration, interactions such as immigration processing. The government could mandate biometrics at routine federal touch points in our lives, right? Social security applications, passport renewals, they already have your picture on file for your passport, healthcare enrollment for the ACA, all of these different kinds of things could start having a biometric identifier requirement. This would push the system towards encompassing all citizens and residents as well. On top of it, we're looking at the integration with civil identity records. Right now, biometric systems are largely separate from civil identity records. And if you don't know what a civil identity record is, it's your social security card, right? You've got it. It's a flimsy piece of paper, or your IRS, the tax returns that you do. You do not have to submit basically your picture with your tax return, right? Driver's license is another one. Those are managed by the states, and the states have state databases. So I'm in Chicago, Illinois. If I've got a driver's license or state ID, it sits in Springfield, the capital of Illinois. It's not going to Washington, D.C., but this is what they're pushing for. And we've already seen DHS and DOJ ask states like Minnesota, for example, for their voter rolls. This is what we are talking about here. So merging biometric identity with civil registries would create a single identity profile for each individual, functionally similar to a national ID, right? And so if they've got my face and they can match my face to my tax returns and everything else, they can then match it to, let's say, using, another platform, that my Facebook account, my LinkedIn, all these kinds of things. They can start to identify very effectively anybody at will very quickly. And DHS expansion suggests a direction towards interoperability across these agencies. And so this really also pushes for the expansion of biometric use in public and commercial settings. The technology already exists, right? Mobile face recognition apps, surveillance cameras, all of that can identify individuals in public spaces. I've done tons of segments on that. And if these systems begin to feed into a central matching engine, think like flock cameras, what they're doing right now, especially with minimal oversight, the system begins to act as a real-time identity system covering essentially everyday movement. And they may be able to mandate that. China's done those kinds of things. Other governments have as well. And I'm not saying the United States is China, but we are starting to put in elements that could very easily be used by the US government in the same way the Chinese government uses a lot of this stuff, right? And reports indicate that Mobile Fortify, for example, and similar tools have already been used to scan US citizens. We caught one in Maine, for example, where the the person was putting the phone to the person's face to record their face, all that kind of stuff. Again, I don't care what your politics are. This is purely on national ID. So On top of this, we have federal data sharing standards and mandates that would have to be changed to favor this, right? Currently, privacy protections vary by agency. They're very inconsistent. We have very little privacy laws in the United States in general, something the Facebooks of the world take advantage of. But a federal standard requiring all biometrics to get reported and stored in the central DHS system would accelerate consolidation much faster than the current voluntary or piecemeal feeds that we have across all of these different agencies. And finally, the creation of legislation that codifies biometric identifiers basically starts to really turn it into an actual national ID. Eventually, Congress might formally authorize the use of biometric identifiers as official national identity markers. So, for example, requiring them for federal benefits, for travel licenses, for voting. That's been a hot issue right now. Again, don't care what you believe on that one. This would outright codify what is currently happening essentially in an ad hoc manner. And so the only real resistance that we have to this right now seems to be civil liberty groups. Right? I mean, this is where DHS is going. It's supported by the majorities in the House and the Senate, obviously the administration as well, and apparently the Supreme Court. And so I think this is a very serious problem. And again, I do not care if you are on the right or on the left. National IDs and consolidation of this data turns surveillance up to 11, but also creates a de facto identity. And I think that is something that we need to have a serious discussion on. We need to put legislation around this because our privacy is enshrined in the Fourth Amendment, right? In the Constitution, we have a right to privacy. We have a right against, illegal search and seizure. We have a right against self-incrimination. That's Amendment 5. And so by virtue of that, anything that moves towards this way without actual legislation, without actual laws, votes, etc., is deeply concerning for me. So I'm hoping this doesn't come to fruition. I know it's heading that way, but quite frankly, we're going to see what happens. And again, I'm not disparaging anybody here. Cybersecurity is agnostic to politics, but we're not immune from it. And same with privacy as well. We should all be able to agree that we want privacy and that there is such a thing as government overreach, no matter who is in power. This is concerning, right? And if you like the current guy and you hate the last guy and you're going to hate the next guy or whatever, doesn't matter to me, because if these things get enacted, the next president, whoever that president is on the political aisle, has that ball and can run with it. It's not good for anybody. So I'll leave it at that. But this is not good. I'm not a fan of this, and I don't like the way where this is moving. So you let me know. I'm looking forward to the comments, good, bad, or just downright mean to me. Either way, I'm sure I'm going to get it all. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please, 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 attempt to stay private, informed, and secure. Take care.